All right, so if I could have your attention, please. So I'm going to take, before I introduce our, if I could please have your attention, thank you. So before I introduce our speaker for this afternoon, I just want to take about 5 or 10 minutes to set up the discussion for today. In my previous lecture, I'd been talking to you about the question of whether India can be considered a democracy, in what way it may or may not be a democracy. We had sort of looked at a broad set of considerations, and as I had mentioned to you in my previous lecture, this is a question that we're going to persist with for the remainder of this course. And I had mentioned to you that I was going to discuss the Constitution of India very briefly, how the Constitution came about, but that's a discussion that we're going to have to save until Thursday, because what I want to do today is to move directly to the theme for this particular week, and that's the question of development and well-being in India since 1947, more broadly in South Asia. And the principal reading that you have for this week is a book by Amartya Sen and John Dress. They've done a number of books together in previous years, An Uncertain Glory, India and Its Contradictions. So this is a book that was published just a very short while ago last year, and it brings up the narrative that we have had in previous books by them all the way to the present. Now, I want to raise a couple of important considerations for your consideration. I want you to think about them, as we move into the lecture on Thursday as well. And some of that backdrop, I think, is going to be interesting in broader ways and in theoretical ways for the presentation that our speaker is going to make shortly. So the first set of considerations is the following, that when we speak of development, we have to obviously ask development for whom? And what do we actually mean when we speak of something called development? There is a politics to development, and we know that there's a very substantial critical literature that has developed on this particular question over the course of the last 3 to 4 decades. Many of the people who are sensitive to the critiques have come up with such conceptions as sustainable development, development with a human face, alternative development. There are some much more radical critics with whose works I'm actually much more sympathetic. So you'll hear a lot more about that on Thursday rather than today. And those critics, in fact, have spoken about alternatives to development, not just alternative development or sustainable development, but alternatives to development. Because the idea of development, in fact, has actually also been quite pernicious in various ways, even though there is a broad kind of liberal consensus about the necessity of development. But one of the things that we know from the work that various scholars and critics have done over the course of the last 4 or 5 decades and activists is that in many parts of the world, in the global south, including India, of course, development's effects have been extremely unbalanced. There are people who have benefited enormously, and then there's a much greater number of people who have, in fact, actually suffered immensely under projects of what are called development. People who have been displaced, for example, by large dams. There's a massive amount of work that has been done on the number of people who have been displaced. It's estimated that 110 million people have been displaced by dams and projects related to large dams globally in the course of the last 3 to 3.5 decades. I'll have to take questions later on because I just want to set up the discussion. Okay, so the broad set of considerations, number one, have to do with the following: that in this particular book, what Amartya Sen and John Dress do is they set up comparisons. All right, so there are comparisons with sub-Saharan Africa, there are comparisons with other countries in South Asia. And you have to think about how they proceed with their task, because the first thing is that most middle-class Indians, if at all, they are interested in the idea of comparison. They usually would like to compare India with China, or they would like to compare India with developed countries. And so one of the strategies that Sen and Dress use is they throw you off immediately by the fact that they're actually making comparisons of India with sub-Saharan Africa, which is a set of countries that India would rather not be identified with or compared with, or they'll make comparisons with countries such as Bangladesh. And one of the most arresting arguments in this book is the argument that, in fact, if you look at many of the critical indicators that are taken seriously, for example, in the UN Human Development Report, such as, for example, infant mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, under 5 mortality rate, or immunization rate, that if you look at these kinds of indices, Bangladesh comes off a lot better than India. Now, I think most people in India would be actually quite surprised to hear that. They would be taken entirely by surprise. So if you look, for example, at immunization rates, the tables that they give you indicate very clearly that Bangladesh has done a much better job. All right, even though the GDP of Bangladesh, all right, and per capita income is in fact lower than it is in India. So one of the things that they're also doing is they're putting into question the aggressive use of per capita income and GDP, which are indices that are taken seriously, of course, by most economists. And they put into question the utility of this, because they argue that there are a whole number of other indices that in fact might be quite critical. All right, so that's one set of things you want to think about when you do that reading. How do they carry out the comparisons? What is the politics of doing comparative study? Why the comparison with Bangladesh, with sub-Saharan Africa, rather than, as I said, just the comparison with China, which is what ordinarily most people would really expect. All right. Now, one or two more brief remarks, and then I'll introduce our guest speaker and turn it over to him. There are a large number of questions that we are not going to be able to address even on Thursday when we look at this section here, but I want you to start thinking about them, and I think this evening's lecture might help you to think about it as well. When we look, for example, at the state of agriculture in India, now it has very often been argued, and I would certainly be one of the people who would be inclined to make that argument, that if you look at British rule in India, in effect, you can say that British rule was book-ended by famines. All right, so the Battle of Plassey takes place in 1757. Late 1760s, 1770, you have a massive famine in Bengal, which wipes out nearly a third of the population of Bengal. Okay, the casualties are estimated to be about 10 million. 1943, now that's 4 years before independence, you have another famine in Bengal. And it's demonstrably true that it wasn't really the shortage of food grains that led to the famine. And this is an argument that Amartya Sen has made, because before he became distinguished for other kinds of work, I mean, his lifetime work for many years was work on famines. And one of the things that he had shown, I think, very convincingly in his work on famines was the following. Number one, that famines do not take place in democracies. And the reason they don't take place is because you do have accountability, you have public perception of things, public knowledge. And secondly, that famines do not take place because of shortages. They take place of food. They take place because of difficulties and entitlements, what he calls entitlements. That is, that people don't have access to, for example, cash, okay, to transfer of money. It's a question of access, entitlements. It's not really per se the shortage of grain or food in a particular area that leads to famines. So if you look at British rule in India, 1943, you have a massive famine. And in fact, we know that there was grain that was being shipped from India to troops in Australia, right, in order to help World War II efforts. And 1770. So that's what I mean when I talk about British rule being bookended. Now, it's been argued that in independent India, you've never really had any famines. Well, we know that malnutrition is a severe problem in India, affects approximately 50% of the population, really. Okay, and we do know that there have been districts in Orissa, for example, where there have been what you would call starvation deaths, explicit starvation deaths. But I think most people would argue, and I think Amartya Sen himself would actually argue, that you haven't really had famines, right? But the geopolitics of food is, in fact, a rather complicated set of questions. So one of the things that they don't do in this book is they don't look, for example, at how the massive agricultural subsidies in the United States have consequences, and I would say largely disastrous consequences for agriculture and for rural life in large parts of the global south, including India. This is something that they don't actually address in this book, because that liberal view that they have has its own constraints. They don't really want to look at the geopolitics of much of this kind of question. Right? So those are some of the things that we're not going to be able to address at substantial length, but I want you to think about them. All right, now finally then let me turn to our speaker for this afternoon. I'm going to make a very short introduction because I want to have as much time for the presentation as is possible. So our speaker this afternoon is P. Sainath. I think it's safe to say that he's not only one of India's most distinguished journalists, he's probably one of the most well-known journalists in the world. But I think his journalism is also very distinct for several reasons. The primary reason why his journalism is quite distinct is that he has spent well over 2 decades covering rural India. Okay, rural India, his career in journalism spans 3 decades, but he spent 22 years covering rural India, remote districts. You're going to hear a lot more about his work, and you'll see it partly through the archive that he's put together here, a People's Archive of Rural India, which is going to have a public launch in December. So this is, I think, one of the hallmarks of his work is that he has, in fact, actually gone out to large terrains and very different and sometimes difficult terrains. He has an intimate familiarity with rural lifestyles, with the lifestyles of Adivasis. The Adivasi population is what, if I may use the English word, it's the Aboriginal population or the tribal population. He has an extensive familiarity with the lifestyles of Dalits. You're going to hear a lot more about them when we look at the whole question of caste in India. Right? He's been writing for the Times of India and more recently, for the last decade, until quite recently, for The Hindu. Both of these are major English language dailies. India has several dailies, but these are 2 of the most well-known newspapers that we have in India. There's a book of his called Everyone Loves a Good Drought, which has, I would say, dozens of stories about access to, or rather failure of access in some cases, to such things as education in large parts of India, to health facilities. So these are stories which in effect actually explore this whole question of development and economic well-being, or in many cases the lack of it, really, frankly, for a vast majority of Indians. All right, so this book itself, published I think 96, late 96, this early 97, has been translated into 10 languages. He was telling me yesterday that it's now in its 46th or 47th reprint. Right? So without further ado, I would like to have you join me in welcoming P. Sainath. I think we could transfer this to you.
I've got,
No, yeah, because they're doing the recording.
Right.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to be talking to you about the most complex part of planet Earth. Rural India, when we talk about rural India, we're talking about 833 million people speaking 780 languages. Okay? Of those 780 languages, 6 are spoken by more than 50 million people, 3 are spoken by more than 80 million people. At the other end of this, 1 is spoken by more than 500 million people, and at the other end of the spectrum are significant numbers of languages which are spoken by less than 200,000 people, and 1 in the northeastern state of Tripura that has 4 speakers left. Okay. So for sheer linguistic diversity, you're not going to find it anywhere else. There's a ride I do every year in the state of Odisha in East India. The ride is just about 280 kilometers. Miles is, how much is that in miles? Maybe, yeah.
Over
200 miles. On which ride, I take a week to do it by car because we stop all the time and converse with people, my friends and I. And on that 200-mile drive, you can record or listen to 40 languages. It's that diverse. Some of these are from families of languages that no longer exist. Some of these have we can't say they're from the Indo-Aryan group or the Indo-European group or the Dravidian group or the Indo-Tibetic languages. They're just unique languages. So much, that's the linguistic diversity. It also has an unrivaled occupational diversity. Which means that the kind of professions that exist across this place, it's really what I call a continent within a subcontinent. The kind of occupational diversity you have in these places, some of those are professions that exist in other countries of South Asia, whether Pakistan or Bangladesh, they do exist, or even in Sri Lanka. But there are some which either don't exist anywhere else or exist in their largest form in India. For instance, how many of you have heard of the fermented liquor called toddy? Yeah, you've heard of toddy. Good. Just one. Well, you tap date palm trees, you climb the date palm, you cut into the sap, you put a pot over there, then you climb down. This is with your hands and legs. There are no elevators, there is no fire brigade to help you, there are no ladders, no ropes, nothing. You climb up and down. You find this profession even in the Philippines, but numerically quite small. Why do I mention this? It's a very unique profession. The average toddy tapper who goes up has to clean each tree 3 times a day because the pot gets full after 3 hours, 4 hours. So he has to go up holding one pot. He's climbing with hands and legs, changes the pot, comes back. In season, he does roughly 50 trees 3 times a day. Do you know what that height is? Twice the height of the Empire State Building. He does that for a living. It's about twice the height of the Empire State Building. At any rate, every day of his life in season, he climbs more than the height of the Empire State Building. He's got no risk insurance. He's got no safety nets. If you fall, you're dead or you're crippled for life. 50 trees 3 times a day. That's a profession. And there are very large numbers of people. The same toddy, if you don't ferment it, if you stop the process of fermentation and add some natural substances to it, becomes molasses. Like you get sugarcane molasses, you get palm jaggery, palm molasses, which are, by the way, sweeter, healthier, and less diabetes inducing than cane jaggery. So he does this incredible service and he earns next to nothing. The toddy tappers as a group are mostly below the poverty line. There are other unique professions like what are called kalasis, once existed all over the world. Nowhere else in the world today do they exist. And there was a time when the Phoenicians were the masters of these. The kalasis are ancient wisdom hydraulics experts. In the ancient world, you had a problem. You built a big ship. Maybe you built a beautiful big ship, but you built it on dry land. The really difficult task was getting that big ship into the water without damaging the base. So that's how slipways, jetties, all these things came up all over the world. But this class of people have been at that profession since before the time of Christ. And to tell you give you an idea of the fact that they are still active, in year 2000 in the southern state of Kerala, a cyclone blew an entire train off a bridge. And the train unobligingly fell plumb in the middle of a raging river, not near the sides, so they couldn't get it out. They brought in the army, which had the cranes to do it, but they couldn't get the cranes close enough. And to build the kind of structures to support the cranes nearby to the train in the water, it would have been cheaper to just let the train remain in the river. the government of Kerala signed a contract officially with this ancient community called Kalasis. They had the train on shore in less than 100 hours. They did not tie ropes around it and pull it. They went into the water. They created artificial embankments, underground canals, used the river in spate, the fury of the river in spate, to push the train to the shore from where the army took over and took it up. So that's the Kalasis and their ancient hydraulics wisdom. They actually had the train out of the water in 100 hours, brought it up to the shore from where the armed forces took over. Now, rural India is, so its occupational diversity is unrivaled, linguistic unrivaled, extraordinary number of, there's a multiplicity of cultures, extraordinary heterogeneity, and it's also in the process of an extremely brutal transformation, which is the economic policies and drive of the last 22 years, neoliberalism at its most intense. So the collapse of agriculture has driven tens of millions of Indians from rural India to the cities in search of jobs that are not there. Some of the most ancient cultures are breaking down. Many of the languages are going extinct. Many of the profession, nobody knows how many schools of weaving there are in India. No one knows how many schools of pottery there are in India. Many of these are disappearing. It should be said that so that we don't romanticize everything that's in rural India, that rural India also has much that is ugly, barbaric, regressive, and needs to be broken down. However, the nature and process of the transformation that is underway is strengthening the barbaric and the regressive and destroying the beautiful and what we need to cherish. Like the Caste panchayats of Haryana have actually become much stronger in the last decade or two than the ones that order. These are caste panchayats. A girl marries outside her caste in the village. They order the execution of the couple. That's a caste panchayat in Haryana, right? And these sort of institutions have actually strengthened with that kind of change, whereas the best and the brightest are in erosion and in breakdown. As when I told you, I've been a full-time rural journalist for 22 years. And we felt, my friends and I felt that we needed to capture this incredible entity, a continent within a subcontinent. To give you an idea, when I gave you the figure of 780 languages, I rang up the guy who did the survey. He conducted India's linguistic survey, Professor Ganesh Devi, and just wanted to confirm with him that it's 780. He said, actually, we got it slightly wrong. I said, how wrong? He said, well, we underestimated by about 100. I asked him, how could you make such a large error, about 100? And he gave me an answer which I believe you can get only in rural India. He said, well, we had only 3,000 researchers. Okay. So, but when you're talking about 833 million people, 3,000 researchers isn't enough. So we decided that we wanted to put rural India, access rural India, give rural Indians an exposure to the world, to do a very different kind of journalism. It's the kind of journalism that I've practiced for 34 years, which is trying to do journalism from below. When I work in the countryside, I stay with the communities that I write about. I live in their areas, I write about them, and I try to see the world through their eyes. So we decided to do this online. It's both a living journal and an archive. It's got audio, video, text, still photos. We have the only collection in existence of about 8,000 to 10,000 black and white images of rural labor and people at leisure as well. And one of the USPs, for instance, if we show you excerpts of some of the videos, one of the USPs is that the videos can be viewed with subtitles in very different languages. So you can watch a video, a film that's been shot in Tamil, you can watch it with Punjabi subtitles or with Telugu subtitles, so that the number of people who can access that grows exponentially. It's also a responsive design site, which means it folds back to your tablet or to your cell phone. If you get onto it, you will find it perfectly accessible on your cell phone. Now, what are the kinds of protocols we follow in making the videos and the number of categories that we have? Oh, just hold that one. This is Indian technology. It's called a jugaad, and it's a miracle of waste recycling. The whole thing has been, that car, that Jeep, has been put together for less than 200, how much is that? 100 is about 6,000. So 10,000 rupees is about how many dollars? Yeah. Can you imagine that has been put together for less than $200? It moves. The front part of it is from a 1938 Willys Jeep. The back part of it is the casing of a bullock cart. The engine is a 5 horsepower water pump. Diesel pump for water of the Kirloskars. The wheels are of different sizes because they've been picked up from the Air Force dump. One of them is an aircraft wheel. Okay? It's called jugaad, meaning something you just fit together. The damn thing works. Okay? It takes food grain from the fields to the home storage. It takes grain from the home to the market. Yeah? It's a miracle of ingenuity that they put. Every single part of that has come out of a waste dump, meaning several waste dumps. The front part has come out of an auto waste dump. The wheels have come out of the Air Force waste dump. Yeah. Incidentally, the auto lobby in 3 states has had the government ban this in the name of safety, because if you can buy a car for $200, who the hell would buy your BMW? Right? So they've got it, they've lobbied and got it killed. But that's just one example of the ingenuity of the countryside. Some of the other professions, can we go to the one guy pushing the coal? Yeah. No, just on the front page. Okay, you're in categories, that's fine. Let it be. Can you move to the next? Yeah, one of the pictures you're going to see is about the most marginalized people. The previous one is about the most marginalized sections. This guy, get to the photo. He is pushing 250 kilograms of coal. That's about 400 plus pounds, almost 500 pounds. Yeah, 2.2 pounds to a kilogram. So he's pushing about 550 pounds of coal on a bicycle. You can't use that bicycle anymore as a bicycle. He's using it as a trolley because it's what he's got. He's picking up coal from a waste dump, in which respect he's providing a national energy saving. And you know what he gets in return for that? It's a criminalized activity. You're stealing from the state-owned mines. But he actually provides cheap coal to poor consumers in the towns. He takes it from the waste dump, and those waste dumps are millions of tons of soil that you dig up when you do open cast mining. From that, there's about 3% of coal which his wife and other women extract. It's an extremely laborious process. Puts it on his cycle, and you can see others in front of him. They walk in long lines because if you fall down, you can't pick it up. You need at least 2-3 others to pick it up. You come to a puddle or a river or a ford, 6 people have got to take your cycle across, then come back for the next cycle. Okay? He earns a net on trip of about 30 rupees. A net of 30 rupees. That's how many cents? 60 rupees. Yeah, that's about 45 to 50 cents roughly. Yeah, and the distance he covers on this particular walk, I know because I walked with him, is 42 kilometers. And he was earlier an agriculturist, but the coming of the mines, the coal mines in the area, destroyed agriculture because open cast mining demands that you dig up between 15 and 25 meters of topsoil and throw it aside. When the coal is over, you can't return to agriculture because the land is gone. Right? So that's again one of these unique professions, so to speak. Yeah. So people are resisting that. People are fighting against it. 1,000 battles, 1 million mutinies continue in different parts of the country as people resist the acquisition of their land by the state to hand it over to large private corporations. I'm going to show you a little video. I don't know how the bandwidth is faring, otherwise we'll show it to you from the USB. But just can you show them the categories page? What all are the kinds of things we cover? This entire site is run pro bono by 200 to 300 volunteers. We're getting about 4 a week. More than 100 of them are professional journalists and who do it free for us because it won't fly in their channels or in their newspapers. They give us their work. Maybe work they've already run, maybe work they haven't run, but they work for us. The first one, if you mouse over the first, you see things we do is about the labor that poor people do. Now that woman, can you just click on that photograph? The woman you see in the photograph, she is a Bonda tribal. She's about 4 feet 2 inches in height. She's carrying 35 kilograms of firewood on her head and walking uphill. If you look at the distance of if you look at the inclination of the wires, she's walking uphill with 35 kilograms of. I tried it. I took it from her and my neck disappeared. Then I very happily gave it back to her, but she was peeved because I was just wasting her time. Right? That's 35 kilograms. That's it's one of the most ancient tribes in the world. It's part of what is called the Austroasiatic family, like the Jarawas of the Andamans. They are linked in that sense and are listed by the Royal Anthropological Society as one of the most ancient hunter-gatherer groups, the Bondas in the eastern state of Odisha. Now this is a very common thing. The average Indian rural woman can spend 1/3 of her waking life on 3 chores: fetching water, fetching firewood, fetching fodder. When you get displaced from your land and the state takes it over, you're moved somewhere else where the distances might double, and that woman is doing twice the amount of work she did, walking greater distances for water, walking greater distances for gathering firewood, and facing the hostility of the new communities where they've been relocated because of the resource crunch. One of the giant battles being fought in the east of India is against the acquisition of land for a project of the giant steel company, the Pohang Iron and Steel Company, POSCO, which is a South Korean company. And 7 villages and thousands of acres of farmland have just been theoretically handed over by the state to POSCO. People are refusing to part with their land and fighting. The journalism from below consists of trying to give them a voice or let them speak to you, let them address to you. In one of the confrontations that happily didn't take place on the day, in the village, it's called Dinkia. It's something like the Asterix's village. It fights all comers. All the villagers had gathered on the edge of the village to resist the police takeover of their land. And one of them is a fisherman, part-time, because he can't sustain himself from it. He's a part-time landless laborer, and he is a poet and a singer. Listen to him. You can watch the There are subtitles in English. Found it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Stop it at 2:30. No, there's no volume. What are we doing? Sorry, we've been having this problem for some time. Do you want to do it off the USB?
Yeah, I'm doing it off my machine, but the volume is not.
Did the volume switch on that?
Yeah. There is, it can take, but this one especially is not.
Yeah, but it should sound here. Yeah. Yeah, but it's there. That's a connection problem. We're just showing you little excerpts of these. This is the sort of stuff that will never make the mainstream channels. It'll never make the newspapers in the mainstream. Yeah? You saw the kind of people who were sitting there. They are out of the bowels of the earth in that place. They're very poor people or marginal farmers. You know? They also have something to say about our process of development. And you saw he was very, if you read the subtitles, he was telling you what will happen when the new port comes, how paddy will disappear, how their other produce will diminish, everything. He's giving you a very good perspective with mythological idiom, with his local religious and spiritual idiom. Now, the website is not only about videos, but I wanted to show you some of those because we have subtitles in English for some of them. You can move to the next region and get an entirely different picture, a very different song, and I'll show you one from the other corner of the country, in Kerala, in the remotest region. It's a panchayat, meaning a group of villages with an elected council. In the remotest panchayat of South India, not a word of English is spoken. Nobody has any written material in English. There are no posters in English, no signboards in English. But when Siddharth and I here, along with 6 others, walked into the local tribal school and asked the kids, this is between class 1 and class 4. The age groups are 6 to 11. And we asked the kids, what's your favorite subject? They said English. Now, how the idea spreads and how the lyrics spread is beyond me. But I should also clarify that not a single potato is grown within 50 miles of this region, of this cut-off region, within 100 kilometers. So, and they don't consume potato and nobody speaks English in the village. When I challenge them, okay, you say English is your favorite subject, show me your English. And these little tags sang us a song in English. Do not ask me where they got the lyrics from. I haven't a clue. What happened? What happened?
This is an older video.
Just a second. Click on it. Yeah. You'll see something at the end of the video. Who gets the credits for the film? Yeah, stop. You can stop it there. The ethical protocols of the website are the film belongs to those girls. It's their credits given first and prominently. If we are doing films on landless agricultural laborers, as we are, some of my friends are doing that for me on landless agricultural women labor, that story of that woman, which might be a video of 10 to 15 minutes, belongs to her. We don't just acknowledge her contribution to the video, we acknowledge her ownership, we establish her ownership of the story. So that, that's also another change in the power equations of journalism that we want to bring about. That this person owns the story. Without her, there wouldn't be a video, there would be a film. Now, if you can, can you go to the resources page? Here's something for students. The entire site is very strongly oriented towards teachers, students, academics, and others. Hold it, just hold it. Yeah. On this page called resources, all official and independent reports connected with rural India, you will find them. We already have 50. We should reach 1,000 in 2-3 years, hopefully. Whatever has a soft copy or an electronic copy will be here. So anyone doing assignments, studying, can go directly. It's not that we're giving you links to the report. We're giving you the full text of the report, resident on one page, and with a quick summary which helps you cite the source correctly. Can you open one of them? Go down to that. Next to that one. Now this is one of the most important reports in India's past 5 decades. It's called the National Commission for the Enterprises in the Unorganized Sector. Now you get the report, the date, the commission members, the copyright, and then we give you just go up slightly. Down rather, sorry. We give you the focus of that report in 2 paragraphs, and then the important factoids. Now go down. The most important facts coming out of the report. At the end of 2004 or 5, 836 million or 77% of the population were living on less than 20 rupees a day. Okay, that's about 35 cents. And constituted most of India's informal economy. Guys, this is a Government of India report. It's not something I wrote. It's a Government of India report which the government keeps very quiet about. In fact, that commission's website has been taken down by the government quietly last year. However, I saved all the reports. So they will now be available on this website. So you have reports on every kind of subject so long as it's connected to rural India. Can we go out of that and go to talking albums and show you other things that students are participating with us? You're going to see a talking album, a few snippets of a talking album shot by a 19-year-old undergrad from Princeton, but a girl from Delhi, Punjabi girl from Delhi, moving to the other end of the country in Kerala and shooting what we call a talking album, because which simply means that apart from the regular captions of the photographs, we have audio captions. Now, 3-4 colleges in India are wanting to work with us so that they can give their students assignments which can go up here, for which they'll be graded, evaluated, well, 80% or 90% by their faculty and maybe 10% by us for the presentation and the communication skills. Here, look at a couple of the photographs from this young, she's not a journalist, she's just a student. Slow.
Welcome to the Green Army's battlefield. This fighting outfit is Kerala State's first skilled agricultural labor bank. Their battle is to ensure food security and make the block panchayats they live in self-sufficient in food grain. They're fighting to boost paddy cultivation and extend it to lands that have lain fallow for years. Also to blend traditional farm wisdom with appropriate modern technologies. This is an initiative of the Vanakanchari Block Panchayat in Thrissur district. It rests on people's participation in farming, but also involves the local government and the state. Most of the female troops of the Green Army are members of Kudumbashree, Kerala's extraordinary anti-poverty program. The training involved also offers some solution to acute labor shortage in the farm sector. I shot these photos with the 97,000 in Varavatpur village of Desmangalam Panchayat, Thrissur.
Let it move.
Moideen has been using the Green Army's services for 2 years. A few years back, labor would have been hard to come by. Now, all it has taken him is an application requesting labor and a fee to the Green Army, which in his case was rupees 3,000. Lata says she likes this work because it is rewarding to revive a piece of land that has lain barren for 8 years. And it is also empowering to be able to earn for her family. Through this job, she manages to earn from rupees 8,000 to about rupees 10,000 in a month. Of course, she...
Correct. Yeah. There are 14 photographs in that album, and each of them has an audio caption describing the picture, which is different from the print caption. It's more personalized, the photographer giving her experience in the field. Can you go to the other one? You saw that photograph on the front page. Go to the second one.
Meet Kishan Yadav pushing his heavy load of coal on a bicycle from which he has removed the chain and reinforced the bars. At some point, he'll remove one of the pedals as well, as it could cause an obstruction to movement or simply break. He walks barefoot, tucking his chuckles close to his armpit. That gives him a better grip on the road. Besides, the poor often seek to protect their footwear more than their feet, especially new footwear. It's one hell of a walk from the loads.
Yeah, move.
This
Go
is
to the
one
next
of the
one. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is well over 600 pounds.
Obviously, somebody did successfully. I tried my hand at it with a much smaller load. I struggled across some 3 kilometers before the real Koilawallas ended my agony and their entertainment. My neck, back, and shoulders ached for days, and I imagined the smell and taste of coal dust in my nostrils, mouth, and throat.
Yeah, it's endless. The project has just begun. It can never be completed. But a couple of other things that I'd like, can you go to the map? Everything, all the content on this site will be mapped. And you can reach the content via the map as well. Now, if you go and click on one of those places and there's content related to that place, it will spring up here. View more content for that. Later, we'll have a filter which will divide it into different sectors. There's one unique sector which I'd like to show you. It's called faces. We are trying to capture the sheer facial diversity of India. In the process, we have found that we are also capturing the occupational diversity. Just scroll up and down this page. All these are Indian faces. There are 629 districts in India. We are photographing one male, one female, and a child or adolescent from every one of 3 districts. So we are aiming at 2,000 photographs across a subcontinent. The A, B, C simply refers to, go to S. All the districts whose name starts with an S comes under the S. And you can look at the sheer diversity of the faces there. Click on the first one. Yeah. Now this is a Kashmiri face in Shopian district, starting with an S. Look at the occupation. He's a daily wage laborer in Shopian district of Kashmir. Can you go to the next face? This is also an Indian face. This is shot Vinay by Madhushri Mukherjee. He's a hunter-gatherer, occupation hunter-gatherer. He's a Jarawat tribal. That's also an Indian face. Next one. A fruit seller, go on. A temple priest, a dairy farmer, all these in different parts of the country. Domestic help, part-time student, part-time laborer, organic farmer, a guide at a religious shrine in Kashmir. This guy specializes in raising bulls for bullfighting. It's a very, very highly specialized occupation. He raises Jallikattu. Jallikattu is a Tamil Nadu phenomenon of bullfighting. The bullfighters don't have swords and weapons. You have to get in there with that bull with your hands. Okay? So he raises those bulls, and they also pit the bulls against each other. Then go to the next one. That's a well digger, a professional hereditary well digger. You have a family farm. She and her family will come and dig you a well between 30 and 60 feet deep with their hands and shovels. Nowadays they've started using a drill and stuff to get past the bedrock, but it's physical labor that creates those wells on the farms. Paddy farmer in Goa. Go on. Also from Goa. You move on. A fisherman in Goa who I think was roughly past his third drink when the photo was taken. And yeah, he's high. And again, another tour guide, a daily wage laborer. Get out of faces. Now we have one of the things that's happened even before the site has gone live. Some students got pretty inspired by this, and 3 young guys in Kerala, in the state of Kerala, divided the state into 3 parts and went about on their own shooting faces not only in every district but in every block. Every district will have about 10 blocks. They're shooting 3 faces in every block. They've already set piece up 400 photographs. They're all journalism students, but so are others also doing it. Okay, go to the categories again. Okay, there are different types of films covering everything from, it's not only about displacement. We cover the martial arts, the most ancient martial arts, and things that people would never suspect can exist in the Indian countryside. Watch this. We did a film on the oldest martial art. Can you hold it? Most ancient of Indian martial arts called Kalari. And deep in rural India, we decided to interview the grandmasters of the martial art. And only in Kerala, in rural Kerala, can you end up with a woman grandmaster. That's a 21-minute film. We don't have the type. I just showed you the excerpt. There's such diversity, such incredible diversity. To capture it, we call it many worlds, one website. Okay? Can we go to the categories and show them some of the articles? There is seamless movement between articles, videos, audios, text, the whole works. Say, if you went here, farming and its crisis. Go up. The after-death industry is an article on how the low bureaucracy harasses and humiliates poor people after someone has died in the family. To get the post-mortem done and to get that post-mortem report, you could spend a few $100s. Okay? So it's called the after-death industry. this is part of the gigantic wave of farm suicides that have been taking place for more than 15 years now in India, with nearly 300,000 farmers taking their own lives. Can you go back to the photograph on the top of it? That's grandfather and grandson. Between them, a generation is missing because his son and his father committed suicide. The old man wanted to tell us his story but kept choking with tears, and he would keep pushing the boy to tell us the story. So that's the story. It's one of the 200 reports we will have on the farm crisis and the farmers' suicides. So in every category we have audio, visual, text. There will be thousands and thousands of text articles. There already are a couple of hundred in the... Now it's an archive and a living journal. Our newsletter will divide the stuff into new stuff and new old stuff. Anything older than 12 months is what we call archival in journalism. And the rest is contemporary. Okay? Now, let me show you one little view, last one on snippet of development from the point of view of a farmer being thrown off the land. She is a highly skilled, Gujari, you have Gujari? She is a highly skilled farmer growing a particular exotic leaf called the betel leaf. It's used in pan, chewing pan, but it also has a large number of medicinal uses in indigenous medicine, like in Ayurveda, for instance. She is challenging the logic. She is challenging and demolishing the logic that the steel project will bring jobs. And she's telling you, it's ridiculous. You're talking about the age of computerization and cell phones and saying that those are going to create jobs for us. Listen to her. Can you make it full screen? She's 70 plus and a farmer doing very well. Okay, we cut it there. It's a 7-minute film where she takes on every proposition of officialdom and tells you why their projects will not create jobs, why they will destroy far more livelihoods than they will create jobs, right? And it's her speaking. You will never see the filmmakers in our films. It's entirely her film. It's her show, her voice that dominates. And the first credit of the film and the ownership of the story is also hers. She is a farmer at 70 plus, working 10, 12 hours every day of her life. Now, about the site, anybody can contribute to it, not even just Indians. We do have people who might come out on field work or studies and then give us photographs in the areas they have worked. Anybody can contribute, but it is a heavily curated site. We are not Wikipedia. A lot of very important decisions are democratically taken by me. Okay, and so it is a controlled and edited site, but the emphasis is to give the space and the time to the voices of ordinary people. Now, since we have just a few minutes left, it's not even, we haven't shown you 1% of 1% of what's already there, and we haven't created 1% of 1% of what's possible. Okay, but it goes live on December 20th, and there is a contact us down there so that people can write to us. Assignments on India, we'll consider. If it's good enough, we'll put it up. If you've written a good piece, we'll put it up. Or we might ask you to redo it from the point of view of a journalistic skill and a journalistic writing. This site is very heavily oriented towards teachers and students in 3 or 4 ways. One, every year you guys do your final assignments and it goes into the exam department's cupboards to be shredded 10 years hence. Okay? Something you put up here will be seen by your peer group, your parents, your friends, your rivals, whoever. And I think it's a great incentive for students to put out their best, because it's going to be seen by others, not just by the examiner. It's going to be a teaching tool for teachers to use. It's already being used. Even though the site is not live, what's there is already being used by teachers in the classroom. I just showed you a few seconds of videos that are 10 to 20 minutes long. Right? So it has a lot to do with students, a lot to do with teachers. You saw the resources and the report stuff that's there. We have sections that enable anyone to participate. We have a thing called Little Takes, on which you can shoot on your cell phone a video. Did you like the Potato song? Yeah. That was shot by Siddharth on his cell phone. No? You can't tell because it was so good, but it was shot by him on his cell phone, and people are contributing stuff like that. Yeah. It's a project that will never be complete and should never be complete. Thank you very much. Yeah.
We have a few minutes for questions. Anybody would like to make a question or offer a comment or a suggestion?
Yeah.
Do people ever not want their voices or their faces recorded?
Yes. Across 34 years in journalism, there are people who will say no, and you cannot force them to. That's their choice, that's their call. It's their story. If they choose not to speak to you, you can't force them to speak to you. But in the conflict situations and in the majority of situations, people also want to put across their point of view. So the larger experience for me, and it varies from state to state. A state like Odisha in eastern India, people are very camera shy, the tribals, the Bondas whom you saw. Those photos, those stories were told by my staying there for a month or 2 months. Then you get accepted, perhaps. I did. In the southern part of the country, where Bollywood, where film actors have been chief ministers, it's the other extreme. People are really, really very, very media savvy. Okay? We have made films on the makers of musical instruments. Okay? The most ancient musical instrument in the south is called the Nadaswaram. It's a work of incredible skill and art. Not only did they ask us to make the film, every month we receive a call from them saying, "What happened to my film? You said it would be up by now. You said we could see it at the internet cafe." Okay, so that's the other extreme. It's also the job of, it's part of the skill set of a journalist in convincing people of our credibility that by talking to us, you will suffer no damage. And mostly, rural Indians are exceedingly polite and generous people, mostly. Yeah. So, yeah. Please go ahead.
Have you faced any backlash from this?
From?
Any danger from the government or?
I've been doing this sort of stuff for 34 years. Okay? As you will doubtless learn from Professor Lal, India is a very peculiar democracy. If you belong to the top 10-15%, you enjoy a democracy that people would not enjoy here. Below that, there is a huge democracy deficit. So suppose I had been a village level stringer or a district level reporter, I'd have been in big trouble. I'd be dead for the kind of stories I do. But since you belong to the right 10%, that's your insurance. Caste background is a factor, class background is a factor, social background is a factor, and the Indian press is fairly anarchistic till now. Now we are getting to be more and more like you. Corporate ownership, absolutely. Some of the stories you saw were done in the mainstream media. The written text articles you saw, they were published in one of the biggest English newspapers in the world. But those spaces are shrinking. So the hostility that I fear is that of corporations, owners, and media owners, and murder in the newsroom. That's really the enemy I fear. States and governments will handle. We've done that before. Cloth-headed censorship stuff, that doesn't work in India. It's too anarchistic, it's difficult. But as I said, that depends on your social background, your class background, the insurance of working for a major national newspaper. If you were a small district level reporter, you'd be in very big trouble. Yeah.
You said you've been in journalism for 30 years and covering rural India for 22 years. Over that time, has stuff generally gotten better, worse, stayed the same? Do you see a greater awareness now that over time? Or?
It's complex. For some people, for a certain section of the population, a smaller section of the population, they're doing better than they ever dreamed they would. For the poorer sections of the population, they're doing a lot worse than they ever dreamed they would. Okay? The big phenomenon, in fact, the migrations, everything, the big canvas phenomenon is the growth of inequality worldwide, and very particularly in countries like India, China, South Africa. That growth of inequality is deadly. So you can have, say today in the countryside, I showed you the story of that farmer's suicide. Who benefits? The seed companies, their salesmen, their representatives, that straighter, the guy who runs the input shop, the input dealer, the guy who's selling you fertilizer, seed, pesticide. He's doing very well. He's on his way to being a millionaire. Yeah. But his clients are doing terribly because their costs are much higher, they're bankrupt, agriculture is tanking, overuse of pesticides has killed the soil and killed farmers also, because pesticide has a very, very, very how does pesticide work? It disables the nervous system of the insect. What makes you think it won't do the same to human beings? So kids spray pesticide in the fields and they have very serious illnesses from that. Children die from it. People die from it. Sri Lanka banned pesticides in 3-4 farming areas because of the kind of problems that came up with it. So return to your question, the inequality quotient has grown so badly that today, as of yesterday, today's 21st, right? 20th, Forbes, you've heard of Forbes magazine. Forbes Asia has a cover saying the 100 richest Indians are now all dollar billionaires, right? At the other end of the spectrum, you have to look at the fact that's 100 people in a population of 1.25 billion, accounting for a net asset worth of 346 billion, which is about 10 to 12% of GDP. In a 100 guys have got it nailed down. Well, 4 girls, 96 guys. So that's the figure. The same nation, we today rank 4th in the list of global billionaires, dollar billionaires. United States at the top, Russia, China have some numbers, then it's us. Okay? But while we rank 4th or 5th in the dollar billionaires, India ranks 135th in human development. In the Human Development Index of the United Nations, we are number 135. We are below every Latin American country, including Bolivia, okay, and every Caribbean country barring Haiti. So you have 2 entirely different planets existing within that, not just in the countryside, but so also too in urban India. So so things have gotten. I would say that these policies that I'm criticizing and attacking I am a direct beneficiary of those policies. I have done better in the last 20 years than in the preceding 20 years. As you said, I've been 34 years a journalist. My last 20 years have been far more useful, prosperous than the preceding 14. But that's not how it has been for the vast majority of people. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Time's up. So let's thank our speaker once.
Thank you.